Chapter 3293. They were all elites who had interned together in New York, and they were all talking about the legal world. Ai Wei arrived early in the morning. She changed into a black dress and let out her long curls. She looked much more charming than her professional self during the day, and it seemed like she was deliberately showing off in front of Yi Mulin. She wanted him to know that he wasn't giving up a tree but a whole forest. So, she held the wine glass in her hand and shook it gently. "Yi, you're late." Yi Mulin smiled faintly and drank the red wine in his glass, not paying much attention to her. His mind was still a bit messy as he dealt with these old classmates. They were all very smart people with high IQs, but it was boring to talk about business during a meal. Ai Wei was the only woman there, and the old classmates knew that she was determined to get Yi Mulin. They smiled warmly and occasionally made some jokes. Yi Mulin didn't care about these things. He wasn't interested in women, but he had a lot of social interactions, so he just listened to such jokes. He was smoking when he heard his phone ring. He immediately took it out. It was his mother. He gestured to go out to answer the phone and walked to a quiet place in the hallway. Mama Ye's voice was worried. "Mulin surely isn't back yet. Has she contacted you?" Yi Mulin frowned and looked at his watch. It was already 10 o'clock. He took a puff and said, "Mom, go to bed early. I'll drive to the Bai family later." Mama Yi was still worried. "Mulin, did you guys fight?" "Mom, don't think too much. It's nothing." Yi Mulin spoke faster. "I'm going to the Bai family now." Then he hung up the phone. He couldn't wait any longer. As soon as he turned around, he saw Ai Wei standing behind him. Ai Wei was the same as before, smiling politely. "What's wrong, Yi?" Suddenly Yi Mulin was a bit lost. Logically speaking, a woman like Ai Wei was perfect, but he still didn't feel anything. Why did he want to turn Bai Xueli into such a woman? If she became like this, wouldn't it be very boring? He stared at Ai Wei, but he didn't know that he was being filmed. From a certain angle, such a stare was especially affectionate. It was even exposed in a tabloid. Only a tabloid would dare to expose young Master Ye's private affairs. Ai smiled. "You don't want to go back for a drink? Maybe another day." Yi Mulin walked past her, his footsteps quick. Ai Wei called him from behind. "Yi Mulin, do you regret giving up on me?" He paused and gave her a precise answer. "No." Ai Wei still had a smile on her face, but only she knew how pathetic she was. She tried so hard to become as outstanding as him, vainly trying to stand as high as him, to be able to look at him eye to eye. She did not have a good family background, but she was smart and hard-working. She thought that if Yi Mulin got married one day, the other party would be very outstanding. However, she did not expect it to be such a woman. In her eyes, such a woman was a defective existence. Such a woman could not even control her own emotions. At this moment, Ai Wei didn't realize that Bai Xueli had received a lot of education, but she didn't know how to control her emotions. The Bai family was a rising star. In the end, they were just like the upstarts in the political world. They were different from the Yi family. To put it bluntly, Bai Xueli was spoiled. In the past, it was the Bai family who spoiled her. Now it was actually Yi Mulin who spoiled her. If he did not treat her well these days, she would dare to slap him, and in front of so many people. Ai Wei would not have thought that if Yi Mulin didn't love her, he would still be willing to look for that woman after being slapped and thrown high heels. It was because he liked her. And she just didn't want to believe it. Chapter 3294. Yi Mulin walked out quickly and sat in his car. When he drove out of the underground parking lot, he realized that it was raining outside. The night in B City was a bit cold in this season. The windshield wipers kept moving, but they soon became dizzy again. Yi Mulin held his phone and dialed the number of the Bai family's elder. He wasn't very familiar with this elder because he couldn't see him whenever he wanted. "Dad, is Xueli back?" Yi Mulin's voice sounded hoarse in the rainy night. The elder of the Bai family was probably still dealing with business. He paused for a moment and told the secretary next to him. Yi Mulin smoked with one hand and held the phone with the other, waiting patiently. After a while, the elder of the Bai family replied, "Xueli isn't back." "Mulin, what happened?" Yi Mulin's voice was low. "Just a small argument. I'll call you back when I find her." The elder of the Bai family nodded and then continued with his work. Yi Mulin put down the phone and suddenly felt a bit sad. Bai Xueli's father didn't seem to care about her 1/10 of his work. He took a deep drag of the cigarette, then flicked the butt and drove quickly to find her. He contacted Mu Bai and told him where Bai Xueli often went, but B City was so big that it was easier said than done to find a person. Yi Mulin drove around B City in a big circle but still couldn't find her. When he got in and out of the car, his clothes were already drenched. At 2 in the morning he received a call from Mu Bai, saying that he found Bai Shueli in a bar. She was drunk and wouldn't leave, so he went to pick her up. When he received Yi Mu Bai's call, Yi Mulin's heart twitched violently and then he put it back where it was. He quickly drove to the bar that Mu Bai mentioned. Fortunately it wasn't too far away. He arrived in half an hour. Night Cat wasn't a very high-end bar. Could even be said that it was a mixed bag. Bai Shueli used to hang out here and was once the goddess of the night scene here. But now she was sitting in the corner like a crazy woman. Her clothes were messy, her clothes were wet, her hair was knotted, and the makeup on her face had long been smeared. She sat there drinking one glass after another until she threw up. She leaned on the table and kept waving her hands saying, "Who is he? I don't care about him. Whoever regrets is a bastard." She raised her voice and waved her hands around. But she couldn't grasp anything. She could only grasp the night air. She was like this when Yi Mu Bai found her. "Shueli," he walked over and sat beside her. He reached out and touched her hair. "Why are you here? It's so late. Why don't you go home?" Bai Shueli's body stiffened and she turned around. When she saw Yi Mu Bai, her body paused for a moment before she lay down again. "Can't I come? Mu Bai, do you think that I shouldn't come to such a place just because I'm the Yi family's daughter-in-law?" She laughed softly. "Now I'm not. I'm no longer Yi Mulin's wife. I'm free." She raised her glass and looked at Yi Mu Bai. "Old Bai, let's celebrate my freedom." Yi Mu Bai frowned as he looked at her. "You drank too much. I'll take you back." Chapter 3295. Yi Mu Bai ruffled her hair. "Let's settle this when we get back, okay?" He coaxed her as if she was a child, but she cried instead. "I don't want to go back. That's not my home." "How is it not your home? My parents like you very much." Yi Mu Bai still had some feelings for her. After all, they had grown up together. Besides being a little willful, there was nothing wrong with her. Bai Shueli lay down and stared at him. "He hit me in front of that woman called Ai Wei. Mu Bai, do you think I'll still want him?" After saying that, her gaze fell back onto the glass and she drank half of it in one gulp. Yi Mu Bai couldn't stop her, so he called Yi Mulin. She drank too much and went to vomit again. When she came back she cried. She even cried on his shoulder. She cried loudly. "Mu Bai, why don't you marry me?" She put her hand on his neck and murmured, "If you marry me, I won't marry him. If I don't marry him, I won't have to do this. Mu Bai, I don't have a home now. I have nothing. If I ask for a divorce, my dad will cut off all my sources of income. I'll starve to death." Yi Mu Bai was a little sad. He patted her back. "I'll provide for you. I won't let you starve to death. You also support me leaving that devil, right?" She murmured. She hugged his neck and lowered her eyes. She was very tired. She wanted to sleep, but she didn't know where to go. It was good to have Mu Bai around. Yi Mulin stood in the corridor of the bar. He looked at his wife who was drunk and threw herself into his brother's arms. His face was pale. He heard her say that it was good to have Mu Bai around. And to her he was a terrifying existence, wasn't he? Yi Mu Bai also noticed his brother. He sighed. His brother's gaze was murderous. He looked down at Bai Shueli and then at Yi Mulin. "She's asleep. Carry her back. She might have a fever in the rain." Yi Mulin didn't say anything and took her. Her appearance was terrible and he hated it the most. He carried her and walked outside. Yi Mu Bai followed behind and touched his nose. When they reached the parking lot, he still reached out and knocked on the car window. Yi Mulin lowered the window, his face expressionless. Yi Mu Bai hesitated for a moment and said, "If you really don't like her or can't tolerate her shortcomings, I know you have a way to get through these 2 years. Everyone will live well." As he said this, his gaze fell on Bai Shueli's face. There were 5 faint finger marks on it. Yi Mulin said coldly, "Mu Bai, you shouldn't be suggesting this." He wanted to start the car, but Yi Mu Bai grabbed onto the car window and said anxiously, "If you love her, then cherish her. If you don't want it to last, then let go now." Yi Mulin's reply was to slowly raise the car window, almost crushing Yi Mu Bai's hand. Yi Mu Bai looked at the departing car and waved his hand. "Burn the bridge after crossing the river. Fuck." In the car, Yi Mulin tilted his head and looked at the drunk woman beside him. His face was dark. She fooled around until midnight. Didn't she think that others would be worried? She was just that immature and irrational. Mu Bai's words popped up in his mind. Chapter 3296. He looked at her quietly, looking at her terrible appearance. He also remembered what she said to him in the office. Yi Mulin, whoever turns back is a bastard. If she wasn't sad, why would she hide in the bar and drink? His gaze softened a little and he reached out to touch her hair. Bai Shuali's head leaned gently on the other side and she murmured, "Mubai, how nice it would have been if you had married me." Yi Mulin's gaze froze. The front of the car swerved and a car in front of him passed by. He broke out in a cold sweat. Then he didn't look at her but focused on driving. But what she said kept appearing in his mind. The person she called when she was drunk was Mubai. Yi Mulin lit a cigarette and took a deep drag. When they returned to the Yi family's mansion in the middle of the night, Bai Shuali was drunk again. She vomited again when she got out of the car, and even Mama Yi was alarmed. "Mulin, why is Shuali drunk like this?" Mama Yi asked worriedly. Yi Mulin carried the woman who had vomited so much that she only had a little strength left, and went straight to the second floor. "Mom, I will take care of her. You and Dad can sleep." Mama Yi was still worried, but her son's face was so unfriendly that she couldn't control him as a mother-in-law, so she could only remind him. After her son went upstairs, she looked at her husband and asked worriedly, "Something must have happened today for it to be like this." She sighed. "I'm really worried that Mulin and Shuali won't last long." Actually, her worries were not without reason. Yi Mulin had no interest in women. Getting married in his 30s was also a fluke. Previously she thought that they were not bad, but now it seemed that marriage needed to be based on feelings. If they were to fight like this, it was really worrying. Yi Mulin carried Bai Shuali upstairs, and went straight into the bathroom in the master bedroom. He filled half a tub with hot water, took off her clothes and put her in to soak. During this time she was half awake. After a while, her eyes opened a little and she unconsciously called out, "Lao Bai." Yi Mulin's hands stopped and he looked at her quietly. After a long time, he carried her out of the water, wiped her casually and threw her on the bed. He took a shower casually and didn't sleep after putting on his bathrobe. He just stood on the balcony and smoked. He was very confused. Mubai's words and Bai Shuali's words were constantly interchanging. He was sure that for the sake of the harmony between the white and night families, he had never thought of getting a divorce. However, Mubai said that if she didn't want to be with him forever, it was best to let go. Indeed, there was nothing about her that he admired. If they could find a suitable way to get along with each other for a few years and the Yi family would retire from politics, everything would come to an end. Yi Mulin smoked and looked at the night view outside. He couldn't help but think of the time when he found her in the bar. She hugged Mubai and said how nice it would be if Mubai was the one who married her. She still has Mubai in her heart. Yi Mulin smiled bitterly. Actually, she was not in the wrong. He had always been the one who forced her to fit into his world. She was just a sacrifice for the interests of the two families. He kept smoking, kept standing, and only when the sky was about to turn bright did he raise his sore eyes, as if he had made a decision. But when he saw Shirley he changed his mind. She woke up early in the morning and sat on the bed with a pale face. She did not care that she was half naked. Turning her head, she looked at him in front of the French window and asked in a hoarse voice, "How did I come back here?" Chapter 3297. Yi Mulin walked over slowly and said softly, "It was Mubai who called me, so I found you." She lowered her head and unexpectedly didn't argue with him. After a long silence she whispered, "I'll move out today." Yi Mulin frowned. "Bai Shuali." She looked up at him. "You don't think I'll sleep with you every night, do you?" "Yi Mulin, I don't have to endure all this." He didn't look very good. "Have you been enduring all these months?" She stared at his eyes and said firmly, "Yes." The veins on his forehead were popping out, and his Adam's apple kept rolling. After a long time, he put his hands on the edge of the bed and stared at her eyes. "Is it because of Mubai that you have to endure everything?" "If you're satisfied then, yes." She looked at him unruly. "I told you, Yi Mulin, whoever turns back is a bastard. I'm not joking with you, nor am I threatening you." She really wanted to leave. Yi Mulin sneered. "Then you should know that you won't have a chance to leave if I don't nod. If you don't mind being cuckolded." She looked at him and smiled. "If you don't mind your mother being disobeyed by me, then you can continue this marriage." He pinched her face. "Bai Shualan, do you still have a heart? Which couple doesn't quarrel? Who talks about divorce all the time like you? Can't bear to leave me?" She knelt on the bed and slapped him. "Can't bear to hit me in front of others?" There were tears in her eyes, but she held them back. "Yi Mulin, I'm not that easy to be bullied." He grabbed her hand and touched his face with the other hand. This was the second time she had slapped him. He stared at her eyes. "Listen, Ai Wei and I used to be together, but we broke up a long time ago. I can understand why you rekindled your feelings." She looked at you as if she wanted to tear your clothes apart. Bai Shuali sneered. "I don't believe you're blind. And what did he do? He called her Miss Bai in front of his old lover and asked the security guards to drive her away. Why didn't she divorce such a husband and keep him for the new year? Yi Mulin was stunned by her words. He really couldn't tell. Frowning, he asked, "How much more unreasonable are you going to go?" "I'm not being unreasonable. It's the end." Bai Shuali calmly said, "For someone like me who has always liked others since I was young, you might have to do 100 things for me to be touched. But if you do one thing that doesn't go my way, I will hate you. Yi Mulin, isn't it good for us to get a divorce? Or perhaps we can be a fake couple." All she said was that she wanted to leave him. To put it bluntly, she didn't have the courage to return to the Bai family, so she chose to live apart from him. To a certain extent, she needed his help. Yi Mulin smiled coldly. "Don't you just want a divorce? All right, I'll take you to see your father in the afternoon to clarify things." Bai Shuali held her breath. He didn't even give her a way out. He knew that if she dared to divorce, she would be banished by the Bai family. However, since he said it, she wouldn't beg him. She still had this little bit of backbone. At most, she would just eat poor old Bai. There was a trace of warmth in her eyes. She wiped it away fiercely. "Yi Mulin, you're ruthless." He pursed his thin lips, looking stern. Bai Shuali got up and went straight to the locker room without washing up. Soon there was a banging sound. Yi Mulin had a headache. That was her packing. Chapter 3298. He waited quietly for a while and heard that she was still inside, so he walked in. She was indeed packing, and one of the suitcases was already stuffed messily. She couldn't do anything well. That was the first thing that came to Yi Mulin's mind. He stood by the door and said coldly, "What are you doing?" "Packing. Can't you see?" She took the suitcase and zipped it up. "Didn't you say that you want to leave?" "Yi Mulin, let's leave now. You don't have to explain anything to my dad. I'm leaving now." She paused and her eyes fell on his face. "If you want to sign, just ask me. Whoever doesn't sign is a bastard." She quickly dragged the suitcase and walked out. Yi Mulin didn't stop her. He stretched his legs. Not only that, he looked at her deeply. "Are you really leaving? You don't want anything?" Bai Shuali stood and said coldly, "Go away." His face darkened and then he said coldly, "You've slapped me. Have you calmed down? Let go of your mother's anger." Bai Shuali sneered, "I said that whoever turns back will be a bastard." "Yi Mulin, you're not a bastard, right? If you're not a bastard, then get out of my way." Yi Mulin's Adam's apple moved. "What if I admit that I'm a bastard?" It was Bai Shuali's turn to be shocked. She opened her mouth wide and said after a long time, "If I want to be a bastard, I have to find a man to sleep with. You're the bastard." She still wanted to leave, but he wouldn't let her go. She was forced into a corner and the suitcase hit on his feet. She ran out by herself. Yi Mulin cursed and reached out to grab her and pull her into his arms. She bumped into his firm chest. He lowered his head and said hoarsely, "Do you still want to run? Let me go, you bastard. I want to find a man to sleep with and make you a bastard." She struggled in his arms and screamed desperately. Yi Mulin's face darkened, but he couldn't do anything to her. She didn't return for the whole night and made a mess. He couldn't hit or scold her now. He could only look at her with a dark face. She still wanted to sleep with another man and make him a bastard. She was still his wife. How could he allow her to sleep with others? He immediately thought back to last night when she cried in Mu Bai's arms and said how good it would be if the person she married was Mu Bai. In front of him, a red mist filled the air. All that was left in Yi Mulin's heart was anger and the image of her and Mu Bai hugging each other. She threw a tantrum the moment she saw Ai Wei, and she threw herself into Mu Bai's arms every day. Did he not feel anything? Yi Mulin's face was cold. He pressed her down in front of the sink and hugged her waist from behind. Their eyes met in the mirror. She glared at him. "What do you want to do? Make love?" His eyes were cold. "Until you don't have the strength to go out and find a wild man for me to be a tortoise." Bai Shuali froze for a moment, then screamed, "Yi Mulin, you bastard!" She screamed, and Mama Ye's voice came from downstairs, "What's going on?" Then there was the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Bai Shuali screamed, "Help!" Her lips were blocked, and the bathroom door was violently kicked shut and locked from the inside. Then she was pressed down in front of the sink and he had his way with her. It hurt even more than the first time. Chapter 3299. Look at me, remember whose woman you are. His voice was so low and hoarse that a certain part of him was as rough as sand, heavy and painful. Bai Shuali opened her eyes wide and stared blankly at the mirror. She had no makeup on and her face was clean. Her double eyelids were very obvious. She looked at him with her eyes open. Tears slowly gathered in her eyes, rolling around in her eyes, but she did not let them fall. It hurt. It hurt a lot. She endured it and lowered her eyes, unwilling to look at his face. She heard a vague knock on the door. It was Mama Ye's anxious voice. Mulin, open the door. What did you do to Shueli? Don't hit her. Her voice was intermittent, but Yi Mulin didn't seem to hear it at all. He continued to hurt her. Later, Mama Yi probably called the male servant to kick the door open. The door was kicked open violently and opened with a bang. Then the servants at the door were at a loss. They thought that the young master was being rough. It was true that he was being rough, but it was a little different from what they thought. Yi Mulin covered his wife's body with his tortoise cover and said in a low voice, "Get out." Not a single servant was left. In all honesty, they saw the young master's P***ns just now. Mama Yi stood there, angry and embarrassed. Bullying a woman in broad daylight like this was really embarrassing for her son. But her son and daughter-in-law did this kind of thing. She couldn't rush in and pull them away even if she forced them. Moreover, her son didn't seem to want to end it. Mama Yi stomped her feet. "I'll tell your father later. It's outrageous." Mama Yi couldn't control her and quickly went downstairs. Yi Mulin looked down at the woman in his arms and whispered, "Do you want to continue?" She didn't speak. He reached out and lifted her chin. He saw a tearful face in the mirror. She didn't call him a bastard like before. She just lay there in tears as if he was rough with her and as if it had nothing to do with her no matter how much he wanted her. A living worm seemed to have died for a moment. Yi Mulin's heart felt like it was stabbed. It was very uncomfortable. However, he did not let her go immediately. He continued to come slowly as he whispered in her ear in a husky voice, "Is it as painful as you? Are you the only one who is in pain? When are you going to grow up?" She didn't make a sound. No matter how much he growled and used violence, she wouldn't make a sound. After one round, Yi Mulin left. Although he had vented his anger, his body was even emptier now. She leaned on the black countertop, quietly looked at him in the mirror and asked softly, "Lawyer Yi, were you satisfied just now?" As if she had poked his sore spot, he took a deep breath and looked at her with an ugly expression. Bai Shueli's entire body was limp, but she still propped herself up. "Can I go now? If you still want it, I can accompany you. After all, we are still legally married, but after today we won't be." She would say whatever words could hurt him. Yi Mulin let go of her and took a few steps back. He looked at her and said, "Believe it or not, without my permission, you won't be able to walk out of this house." Bai Shueli smiled coldly. "Doesn't Lawyer Yi like to talk about the law the most? Why do you want to do something illegal?" I said, "I'm the law here." He looked at her. "You can try." Chapter 3300. Yi Mulin's eyebrows loosened. After a while, he said in a low voice, "I know you like Mubai." She couldn't bear it anymore. She picked up a face-washing float from the counter and threw it at him. The edge left a mark on his cheek, but he still looked at her quietly. Bai Shueli glanced at him, slowly pulled up her clothes and walked out. She didn't go back to the bedroom. Instead, she went downstairs to eat something. She ate quietly and didn't say anything. Mama Yi was a little worried. "Shueli, Mulin didn't hit you, did he? I'll ask his father to teach him a lesson later." Bai Shueli looked up and was stunned. "No, thank you." Mama Yi was even more shocked, because she saw a glimmer of light in her little wife's eyes. Why did Mulin treat his wife like this after a quarrel? Women needed to be coaxed. How could he be rough? She wasn't like those rough men. How could Shirley withstand Mulin's torment? Mama Yi didn't say it, but she actually saw that there was a bruise on Bai Shueli's wrist. Must have been left by that bastard. Mama Yi hesitated for a long time but still didn't say anything. At this time, Yi Mulin came downstairs slowly. His eyes fell on Bai Shueli's face. She didn't pay attention to him. She didn't look at him either. She didn't talk to him either. At this moment, Mama Yi looked up and saw her beast of a son. She was furious. He was dressed neatly and looked like he was going out. He hurt his wife like this and still wanted to go to work. Mama Yi was unhappy. "Mulin, can't you take a day off today and stay at home with Shirley?" Yi Mulin looked at the rice worm and said coldly, "I'll ask someone to accompany her." Mama Yi was furious. "Are you asking someone to watch Shirley? She's not your prisoner." Yi Mulin had finished breakfast and got up. "Mom, I'll come back early." His eyes fell on the rice worm again. The rice worm didn't pay attention to him. It didn't look at him either. She didn't want to talk to him. His heart was stifled. Why did she want him to accompany her? She only had that bastard Yi Mubai in her heart. The eldest son of the Yi family took his briefcase and went to the office with a heavy heart. The Yi mansion was surrounded by dozens of bodyguards. Not to mention by Xueli, even a mosquito couldn't fly out. Yi Mulin went to the law firm. The junior lawyers in the firm were still respectful when they saw him, but there was something strange about him. He guessed that it was probably because of Bai Xueli yesterday, so he didn't think too much about it. However, as soon as he entered his office, the intercom rang. He reached out to pick it up and Secretary Li's voice came over. Lawyer Yi, a tabloid published a photo of you and Lawyer AI today. The influence of the tabloid is not big, but, after some ferment on WeChat moments, your past relationship with Lawyer AI has become a hot topic. Yi Mulin frowned. What picture? Secretary Li braced himself and said, the photos from last night's gathering. You better pay attention to it. Whether it's your identity or your marriage, they're both very important. As soon as he finished speaking, Yi Mulin had already hung up. He searched for it directly and then saw the legendary explosive photo. In the corridor of the hotel, he and AI Wei stood face to face. He frowned slightly while AI Wei stared at him affectionately. No matter how he looked at it, they looked like they had an unforgettable relationship. Damn it, he cursed under his breath. Chapter 3301. Yi Mulin stared at it for a few seconds and called his bodyguard. Take away all the newspapers in the old house. Don't leave a single one. After hanging up, he looked at Secretary Li. Contact Lawyer AI and ask her to clarify. Secretary Li paused and coughed. It seems that this kind of scandal can be clarified unilaterally. Otherwise, it will make people think of something else. Yi Mulin looked at his secretary and frowned. Really? The secretary nodded. Yes. But Lawyer Yi, do you want to call Mrs. Yi to explain? Yi Mulin had actually thought about it. But thinking of Bai Xueli's current situation, he said calmly, no need. Secretary Li hesitated for a moment and then went out. Yi Mulin turned on his computer and searched for the news about him and AI Wei. At this time, his father called him and said that he would solve the problem on the internet, but he had to solve Bai Xueli himself. The news had spread like wildfire. Bai Xueli only needed to click on the news to see that it was almost overwhelming. Yi Mulin hung up the phone and sat in the office for a while. Then he stood up and walked out with his coat on his arm. Secretary Li came out. Lawyer Yi, are you going out? Yi Mulin paused. I won't come today. I need to change the schedule. Secretary Li smiled. Got it? Yi Mulin was about to leave when Secretary Li stopped him. Lawyer Yi, Lawyer AI Wei called and said that she wants to change the appointment to today. Just say that I don't have time. Yi Mulin's voice was cold. Just help me get rid of this kind of thing in the future. Secretary Li said in a low voice, I thought Lawyer AI was very important to you. Yi Mulin glared at her and walked out quickly. Secretary Li happily went back to drive him away. So when Yi Mulin got in the car, he received AI Wei's call. He fastened the seat belt with one hand and answered the phone with the other. AI Wei's voice was faint. Mulin, are you angry at me? I didn't take those photos, I swear. No need to swear. It doesn't matter who took them. Yi Mulin's voice was cold. And to avoid misunderstanding, AI Wei, call me Lawyer Yi from now on. Understand? After he finished speaking, he directly hung up the phone. He was not afraid of offending her at all, nor did he take her identity as the chief lawyer of the other company seriously. On the other side, AI Wei looked at the phone that had been hung up and chuckled. You're still as arrogant as ever. On the other side, Yi Mulin's car arrived at the Yi mansion in less than an hour. The Yi mansion had been turned upside down. Bai Xueli saw the news on TV. Mama Yi was there too. She cried when she saw her little daughter-in-law. Then she went upstairs and slammed the door, refusing to come out. Now that her son was back, Mama Yi was more than happy to see him. She quickly whispered in his ear, Mulin, what happened to you and that AI Wei? How did you take such a photo? Shirley even cried. Yi Mulin was already on his way upstairs. He paused and held onto the handrail. He frowned and looked at his mother. Did the rice worm cry? Chapter 3302. Yi Mulin looked at his mother and said faintly, she doesn't mind. Mama Yi wanted to get angry, but she had always been gentle. In the end, she just said, be good, Xueli. I think you're crying very sadly. Yi Mulin asked again, is she really crying? Mama Yi sighed. Mulin, you just want her to cry, don't you? Yi Mulin didn't say anything else and went upstairs. He walked to the door of the master bedroom and opened it without knocking. His worm was lying on the bed with her back to him. She should be sleeping. He was a bit disappointed. His mother said that she was crying, so he thought she cared. He walked over and sat by the bed to see her, only to see her wiping her nose with a tissue. Was she really crying? He leaned over to take a look and saw that she was really crying. She was crying with snot and tears all over her face. Emulin was indescribably happy. He didn't comfort her, just like a child who had bullied a little girl. Instead, he pulled her over and said, "Didn't you say that whoever regrets is a bastard? Why are you crying now, little bastard?" "Yes, of course I'll cry when I'm widowed." Baishuali took a tissue. "Emulin, get out." He didn't get out and his face was dark. She got angry and threw the tissue box at him. "Get out, did you hear that, you cheating man?" He stared at her for a long time and said slowly, "Are you so angry because of AI way? Didn't you say that you want a divorce? Didn't you say that whoever regrets is a bastard? Why are you angry?" She buried her face in the quilt and ignored him. After a long time she said, "Let's get a divorce." He looked at her for a long time and said softly, "Baishuali, apart from being a worm, you're also a coward. Don't you dare to admit that you like me?" Baishuali immediately got up from the bed and glared at him. "I don't like you." "Really?" He dragged the word and pinched her face. "Then why are you crying like this? Is Mubai ignoring you, or is he not willing to give you money?" Baishuali was furious and slapped his hand away. "It's none of your business. I just like to cry." She sat on the bed and wiped her face with a tissue. She threw it on the bed after wiping it. Tears still fell. She still remembered the shock she felt when she saw that photo. She saw her husband and his first love looking at each other affectionately. How could she stand it? Bastard, bastard. Emulin just looked at her ugly and dirty crying face. Actually, he was a man who had a lot of work to do and was very busy. Usually he would get off work at 9 o'clock. Even if he came home early, he would read some legal documents. But now, he was wasting his time and life to accompany her in wiping her tears. She cried, but he didn't comfort her. He just sat at the side. Baishuali had cried enough. She gritted her teeth and said, "You adulterous couple, Emulin, I want a divorce." He just looked at her and smiled. What was even worse was that he was smoking a cigarette. She was furious. "Did you hear that? I want a divorce." "Yes." His voice was very slow and leisurely as he smoked his cigarette. When he was almost done, he looked at her. "Do you really want a divorce?" "Yes." She glared at him. Emulin's voice was very calm. "It's fine if you want a divorce, but you have to think it through." Chapter 3303. Baishuali fell into his arms and stared at him. "What do you want to do?" "Nothing. I just want to tell you the consequences of leaving me." He looked down at her swollen face. To be honest, her face was not the type that he liked the most. He preferred classical features, but she had a European face with sharp eyes and a small nose. He secretly felt that she looked like a monkey. It was undeniable that it was a mainstream, superficial beauty. He didn't appreciate it at first, but now that her little nose was red from crying, she looked more adorable. Emulin lowered his head and rubbed her nose with his nose. He murmured, "If you leave me, there may be a lot of female demons around me. I may do the things that I do with you with others. For example, the lawyer AI way that you care a lot about." Baishuali stared at him, and every word he said was brushing against her lips. It was obvious that he had seduced her. She tried to stare at him. He chuckled and trapped her with his long arms and legs. He pressed his forehead against hers. "You want me to hit her butt? Do you want me to do what we do? Kiss you like this, huh?" As he said that, he kissed her lips gently and seductively. Baishuali forgot to cry. Damn, this old man was really good at seducing people. But no matter how he seduced her, it couldn't change the fact that he went out to have an affair. Wasn't he very busy? If he didn't do anything wrong, why did he come home to coax her in the daytime? Last night, she was drinking alone and he went out on a date with AI Wei. Rice Worm felt a knife twisting in his heart. He couldn't forgive him at all. When he kissed her, she suddenly couldn't stand it and turned her face away. She cried. "What's wrong?" His voice was unprecedentedly gentle. He admitted that he deliberately coaxed her. The photo last night was actually nothing. It would be fine after he explained it. But he knew that it would affect Baishuali's life in the future. Their identities determined that this matter wouldn't end easily. So he coaxed her. He thought that he wouldn't feel bad, but when he saw her cry, he was unexpectedly distressed. She cried and said that it wasn't for him. "Go away. Emulin, can you be a little more promising?" "Yes, I'm a good for nothing. I can't bear to part with the little bastard." He pulled her into his arms and threatened in a low voice, "If you cry again, I'll hit your butt." She was forced to lie on his shoulder and angrily bit him. She didn't let go until it bled. After that, she cried silently. I don't want to live with you anymore. He didn't care about the wound on his shoulder. Instead, he took a tissue and wiped her tears. Then he said softly, Shweli, it's my fault. Are you unhappy that I called you Miss Spy? You asked the security guards to kick me out? She sniffed. And you slapped me in the face. The more she thought about it, the angrier she became. She said again, I don't want to live with you anymore. Are you angry or do you not like me? He held her face and forced her to look at him. She did not want to look at him, so he forced himself to look at her. She wailed and finally looked at him. Yimulin, take your hand away. He still stared at her little face. I've already returned the slap. Do you want to hit me again? As soon as he finished speaking, she slapped him. Chapter 3304. Yimulin's face darkened after being slapped by her, but he controlled his temper. Have you calmed down? He knew that he wasn't a man with a good temper, but he had let her slap him 3 times. He had to change this shortcoming in the future. He swallowed his anger, but the rice worm wasn't moved at all. She still glared at him. I don't want to live with you anymore. She wanted to run after saying that, but he caught her with one hand and said in a low voice, the photo is just a problem of angle. I'm not with her, and I have no intention of betraying the marriage. In his mind, this could be considered a confession. But he was facing a rice worm and she was waiting for him to slap her. She slapped him in front of so many people. Didn't she want her face? She didn't speak and ignored him. Yimulin stared at her. You really can't forgive me? No. She lowered her head and bit her lips. Yimulin suddenly laughed. All right, I can't do anything if you don't forgive me. I'm going to work. By the way, Secretary Lee said that lawyer AI Wei wants to see me today. I rejected her, but I can see her now that I'm free. After saying that, he was about to get up. The rice worm didn't stop him, nor did she say anything angry. She just sat there with red eyes. She didn't know what to do, and more importantly, she was at a loss about the future. Yimulin looked at her and suddenly couldn't bear to see her like that. Maybe he was really bad. Just like what his mother said, she had been like this since she was young. Why should he be so harsh to her? In her world, there was only one feeling, and that was you don't like me and I won't like you anymore. It was that simple. Actually, he was sure that she had already liked him and maybe she still liked him now. But now she decided not to like him anymore. This kind of little fool was really hard to deal with. He smiled helplessly and sat next to her with a dark face. The bed is so messy and you didn't even clean it up. Have you decided to be a rice worm? Let's divorce. You don't have the right to call me a rice worm anymore. She opened her eyes and lowered her head. Yimulin, I mean it. I don't want to live with you anymore. I hate men who hit their wives. She wasn't good, but no matter how bad she was, as long as he didn't annoy her, she would give him face outside. But that slap made her feel very cheap. If a man slapped you and gave you a date to eat and you immediately said that it was very sweet, that would be too cheap. Her stubbornness made Yimulin feel helpless. But in his heart, he really wanted to hold her back, so he actually picked her up and walked to the bathroom in a good mood. She anxiously punched and kicked him. Bastard, what are you trying to do? He looked down at her with a look of disgust. You're so dirty. I'll help you wash it. Take a shower? He was stunned for a moment before he was thrown into the bathtub. Yimulin adjusted the temperature of the water and turned it on. At the same time, he peeled her like a duckling and sprayed water all over her face. She was about to go crazy, but the man seemed to be amused. His Xiongnu accent vibrated and he let out a deep laugh. Yimulin, you bastard, let me go. She floated in the bathtub and drank a lot of water. I can't swim. Let me out. He put too much water in and pressed her down. She was extremely uncomfortable. Yimulin chuckled. Now you don't look like a rice worm anymore. You look like a little tortoise. Chapter 3305. Bai Shuali grabbed his collar and pulled him down with all her might. She pulled and finally he was dragged down. There was a lot of water in the bathtub and now it was overflowing. The water flowed all over the floor but no one cared. He was dragged in. She felt that she was suffocating. As she floated up and down, she was held by him and placed on his waist. Yimulin's clothes were on him, but she was in a mess. Her hands were on his waist and she looked like a puppy that fell into the water. And he had stripped her clean. Somehow, his arms came around her and he leaned forward to kiss her on the lips. She was wet all over and seemed to be in a daze. She just stared at him. She looked so pitiful. Yimulin's gaze softened and he whispered, Shuali, let's stop fighting, okay? Before she could come back to her senses, he kissed her again. He had his way in the bathtub. The water seemed to be boiling and she finally came back to her senses. She wanted to struggle and resist, but she couldn't. He was so strong that she broke in his hands easily. He only had sex with her once in the bathtub, and then he carried her back to the master bedroom. He waved away the paper balls and put her on it. It was the first time that he worshipped her like this, from top to bottom. Shuali kept scolding him. She pulled his hair and scolded him for being obscene and shameless. But in the end, her throat felt like it was on fire. She couldn't make a sound anymore. She could only pull his hair and helplessly endure everything he gave her. Lawyer Yi didn't go to work. He coaxed his wife at home for almost the whole morning. When it was almost noon, while he was still warm, the phone beside him rang. He didn't stop and picked it up directly. It was on speakerphone. It was AI Wei on the other side. Mulin, I still feel that our matter has affected your marriage. Can we talk about it? AI Wei was unwilling to give up. She wanted to talk to him about the photos, but the phone rang a second later. It was the sound of a man and a woman at that moment, especially by Shuali, who was meowing like a kitten. She was so loved that she felt like she was going to break. AI Wei could almost imagine that scene in her mind. It was something she didn't want to think or believe. She would rather believe that Yi Mulin and Bai Shuali's marriage was just like that day in the office, cold and without warmth. But now they are making love at noon. AI Wei didn't want to believe that the man who hadn't touched her all this while would press down on another woman without restraint. No, he was not such a greedy man. He was so abstinent, how could he like to hold such a shallow woman? Sherry must have seduced him. At this moment, Yi Mulin's voice sounded faintly. It doesn't affect anything. My relationship with my wife is still very good. Just as he was about to hang up, the worm in his arms suddenly looked up, crawled up, and gently bit his Adam's apple. Like a kitten, it nibbled, kissed, and licked. He groaned in embarrassment. His rough and hoarse voice was very pleasing to the ears. When a man screamed, it was much more sensual than a woman. On the other side, AI Wei immediately hung up the phone, her heart heaving up and down. She convinced herself that it was nothing. They were husband and wife. Making love was nothing. He was just fulfilling his duty as a husband. Chapter 3306. In the main house of the Yi family, Yi Mulin finally let her go. He rolled over and pulled her into his arms again. Are you still leaving? He asked in a low voice. Bai Shuali bit her lip. Of course. Yi Mulin, don't think that I'll forgive you just because we slept together once. It's not that easy. He wasn't angry. He lay down and curled her long hair. What do I have to do to make you willing? She didn't say anything. After lying down for a while, she said softly, I'm a little tired. I want to sleep. Then she lay down on the pillow and really fell asleep. She hadn't slept well for a whole day and night, and she had been fooled by him for so long. Yi Mulin wanted to talk to her again, but he didn't have the heart to wake her up when he saw that she was asleep. He went to take a shower and went downstairs while she was sleeping. Mama Yi was downstairs. She was a little surprised to see her son coming downstairs. She thought that the two of them would only quarrel. Yi Mulin stretched. Ask Aunt Gue to bring some food over. I'm a little hungry. Mama Yi rolled her eyes at him and whispered to her son, Shuali, you've been married to her for a few months. Are you ready to have a child? At this time, Aunt Gue brought the food over and pricked up her ears. Mama Yi glared at her and Aunt Gue immediately ran away. Before eating, Yi Mulin glanced at his mother and smiled. I didn't plan before. Shuali took her medicine. What about now? Do you have any plans? Mama Yi asked quickly. Actually, she wasn't in a hurry. Her two sons were in their 30s. One was just married and the other didn't even have a girlfriend. It was really worrying. So she was looking forward to it. Yi Mulin didn't even have a child after such a long time. In private, old Yi also complained that it was useless. Yi Mulin looked at his mother and didn't say anything. He just nodded slightly. This attitude was very gratifying for Mama Yi. Her eyes lit up. When Mu Lin was eating, Mother Yi could not help but personally cook for her son. She even gently patted her son's shoulder. Let Auntie Gue help you make up for it. If your father knows that you're working hard, he won't let you do some work. How about this? Let Mu Bai go to some social events if he can. Yi Mulin frowned. Mom, is it that exaggerated? Mama Yi smiled. It's been hard on you too. Mu Bai, it's still early. You've worked hard. Yi Mulin was helpless, but when he lowered his head to eat, the corners of his mouth curled up. He thought to himself that it was actually not bad to have a daughter who looked like a rice worm. His first thought was of a daughter, not a son. After Yi Mulin finished his meal, he went back to his room to take a look. Rice Worm was still sleeping. It must have been too tired because of him. He sat down and reached out to pinch her face. She seemed to have lost a lot of weight in just 2 days. He sighed, and then his gaze fell on her lower abdomen. He wasn't using protection today. If she wasn't in her safe period, they might have already had a child. After all, he had done it a few times today and the quantity was high. He sat for a while, then went to the study and took out a paper bag from a drawer. The broken phone and black diamond card. The necklace and ring were intact, but the bracelet was broken. Yi Mulin wasn't a superstitious person, but the broken bracelet bothered him. He didn't feel good about it. Chapter 3307. Mama Yi was comforted. It's rare that you know how to love your wife. She paused. Why did you go out? To the office? Of course, Yi Mulin wouldn't say anything too private, even to his mother. He coughed. I have something to do. I'll be back in 2 hours. Mama Yi nodded. Yi Mulin drove out and went directly to the counter where he bought the bracelet. Of course, the shopping guide remembered such a big customer. Mr. Yi, what can I do for you? Yi Mulin took out the necklace. It's broken here. Can it be repaired? The shopping guide took it out and looked at it. Then she said with some regret, maybe not, Mr. Yi. Our craftsmanship is unique. It can't be repaired if it's broken in the middle. Yi Mulin looked at it silently and looked up. As long as it's in the middle, it can be repaired, right? Theoretically, it can be repaired, but we only sell the whole thing. We don't sell this small part separately. The shopping guide said in a low voice, of course you can order it outside, but it will be different from ours. Yi Mulin looked at her. If I buy an identical one from your counter, can you use the new one on top of the old one to fix it? The shopping guide couldn't believe it. Buying a new one for more than 10 million just to take a small part and put it on the old one? Just how unprofitable was this? She was shocked and stammered, Mr. Yi, of course, yes. Do you want to pay by card? Yi Mulin looked at her with a look of, what else? And then swiped his card. He thought that if he swiped the card of the rice worm, she would definitely quarrel with him and cry in front of him. Just thinking of her like that, he felt that she was superficial and ridiculous, but she was also quite cute. He swiped the card, and the shopping guide immediately called the brand maintenance manager, who helped Yi Mulin repair the old bracelet as fast as possible. She put it in the box with a meaningful look. Mr. Yi, it's done. As for the new one, after it was taken apart, there were actually a few nice diamonds on it. Yi Mulin didn't care much about it and casually put it in his pocket. Finally, he threw it into the drawer of his study. He took the bracelet and went to the first floor to buy a phone. This time it wasn't an Apple phone. Instead, he spent some time looking for the flamboyant diamond-encrusted version that she used to use. It cost 880,000 yuan. What a waste. Driving back to the night house, he took off his coat and looked at his mother. Is she awake? Mama Yi smiled. Not yet. She couldn't help but reprimand him. Mulin, take it easy next time. Girls shouldn't be so rude. Just looking at you. Yi Mulin looked at his mother. Do you want to have grandchildren? Mama Yi did not say anything. After a while, she sighed softly. Anyway, you just do as you see fit. Yi Mulin smiled and walked upstairs. Bai Shuili woke up and was sulking. He stood at the door. What are you thinking about? She glared at him. Why didn't you take precautions today? Yi Mulin walked in and sat on the edge of the bed. He smiled and asked, what do you think? She was not stupid. She quickly guessed that he did it on purpose. So she opened her eyes wide. You want me to get pregnant? He did not deny it. He smiled faintly, took out the bracelet, took her hand and put it on. Just right. Chapter 3308. She looked at him in a daze. Yi Mulin smiled. At this moment he only had one perfect spot of satisfaction. He never thought that one day this spot he added for her would save her life. And it was also this vague kindness that saved her and also saved himself. Bai Shuili looked down and looked down. I don't want it. She wanted to take it off, but he stopped her and said in a low voice, do you still want to lose your temper with me? There was a phone in his hand. It was beautiful and flashy. She should be happy, but she just stared at him. After a long time she looked down. I don't want to forgive you. These words were a little childish. It was cute. And also very annoying. Although Yi Mulin didn't coax people often, he knew that her anger was mostly gone. She was just throwing a tantrum. As long as he let her go, this matter would be over. After they got married, he had been suppressing her. After their relationship got better, this was the first time they had a fierce conflict. And it was because of an unrelated woman. Actually, it had nothing to do with AI Wei. It was his own problem. It was caused by his and by Xueli's personalities. He looked at her throwing a tantrum and suddenly found it interesting. It was also interesting to indulge her. He was a little harsh on her outside. She was like this. If he really didn't like her, how could he sleep with her? He had been secretly paying attention to her since she was young. He was the one who hated her. He couldn't let it go, so why struggle? He hooked her chin and teased her like a puppy. What are you going to do if you don't want to forgive me? He leaned against the headboard, reached out, and pulled her into his arms, looking at her. Even if you don't divorce, I will still have an affair like you. She bit her lip. Yi Mulin frowned. What do you mean by having an affair? I mean having an affair. She stared at him and only dared to whisper. He laughed. Then who are you going to have an affair with? Mubai? She looked at him secretly and then didn't say anything. Yi Mulin smiled and pinched her face. If you dare to sleep with Mubai, I will skin you. Then I will sleep with someone else. She snorted and glared at him. He suddenly said, I've only been with AI Wei for over a month. We haven't even had a deep kiss. She looked at him suspiciously. Yi Mulin smiled. You don't believe me? It has nothing to do with me. She hung her head again, not wanting to talk to him. Yi Mulin's heart suddenly softened. His millet worm was actually very cute. It was obvious that he didn't mind, but he refused to admit it. He hugged her and kissed her. His voice was hoarse. Can anyone else be as good as me? She struggled in his arms and glared at him. Yi Mulin, you're shameless. He smiled and passed the phone to her. Calm down, huh? She glanced at it and pink bubbles appeared in her eyes. How did he know that she had her eyes on this one? She hated the iPhone to death and forced herself to use it, yet he was so mean to her. And hit her. Still don't want to forgive. She groaned again, hanging her head, toying with his tie. As a man, he would be a pig if he didn't express himself at this time. Yi Mulin lowered his head and kissed the corner of her mouth. What else do you want? I don't have enough pocket money. Also, it's too tiring to do it every day. Once a week at most. She raised her chin and looked at him. Chapter 3309. Yi Mulin smiled and asked, just one night? She grunted and looked at him, certain that he would not agree. But Yi Mulin agreed. He thought for a while and said softly, then I'll finish my work in 1 day a week and accompany you. The words accompany you were said in a weird way. Bai Xueli opened her eyes wide. Was he what she thought he was? Yi Mulin smiled and said, let's have fun that day. It meant that he would not let go of her for 24 hours. Rice Worm thought about its skin. Rice Worm tightened its skin around itself and glared at him. Yi Mulin pulled her hair and said slowly, it's okay if you don't want to be worn out. Then we'll pay in installments, okay? She was about to cry. What installments? Yi Mulin smiled and changed the topic. You don't have enough pocket money? Bai Xueli, you don't have enough money every month. Have you ever thought about those children who don't have enough to eat? Yes, I am vain, I am shallow, I only care about my own life and death. She whispered and said confidently, I can't even live well myself. How can I care about others? Besides, others will look noble if they are compared with me, right? Yi Mulin was so angry that he laughed. He looked at her and said, are you so useless? She suddenly came over and hooked his belt. Such a small action made Lawyer Ye's blood boil. They had been married for several months, and this was the first time she took the initiative. But obviously he thought too much. Bai Xuelan hooked his belt and said, your belt is only tens of thousands. Why didn't you think about the children who don't have enough to eat when you bought it? My mother bought it. He said in a hoarse voice. She glared at him and then moved her little hand to his shirt. This shirt should be more than 8,000. My mother bought it. His eyes were deep. Her little hand was still moving. He caught her hand and stared at her. Bai Xueli, don't you think you are neglecting your duty? She stared at him. How am I neglecting my duty? Didn't I lie on the bed and let you do it? He smiled helplessly and pulled her hair. I mean, why didn't you buy my clothes? I don't have money. She said matter-of-factly, besides, you didn't buy it for me. He looked at her and chuckled, then I will buy it for you in the future. You can buy it with me. He stretched and said, I'm in my 30s. I can't let my mother worry about my clothes, right? His rice bug clutched his pocket tightly. Swipe your card. Don't touch my pocket money. He held back his laughter. Okay? Bai Xueli suddenly remembered something and said, okay. He smiled. Bai Xueli didn't say anything else. Did you remember your card? Do you want to be a little bastard? I don't want to be a bastard. She glared at him. Give it to me or not. Then he turned around angrily and said in a low voice, It's clearly your fault. It's clearly your own fault for messing around outside. You even hit your wife. I don't want to forgive you at all. It's useless even if you beg. Yi Mulin looked at her and said in a low voice, It's your fault. You were the one who broke the shoes and hit your wife. I don't want to forgive you at all. It's useless for you to beg. Mom gave it to me? She didn't take it. She was still thinking about the money. He stared at her. She was thinking about Mubai's money, wasn't she? Chapter 33:10. No, I want you to go shopping with me. She bit her lips. I want to go shopping in Milan. Lawyer Yi thought that she really couldn't change her habit of eating shit. But there was no other way. He was the one who begged her. He hummed and agreed. But in his heart he was thinking that he could go shopping during the day and the nighttime belonged to him. Rice Worm's heart was already in heaven, but she was embarrassed and unwilling to show her enthusiasm. In fact, the only advantage of marrying Yi Mulin was that he was a lawyer who only wanted to get what he wanted. She could buy everything she wanted in the Bai family. Just like what he said, she was restricted by her father's identity. In fact, this was why the two sons of the Yi family didn't go into politics, but chose to be a lawyer and a star. No one knew that the Yi family was going to cultivate the third generation, which was a good way to avoid some risks. But Rice Worm couldn't think so much. Her mind was full of the scene of shopping in Milan. Just thinking about it made her angry. Turning around, she proactively placed her little face on his lap and prostrated herself under Lawyer Ye's trousers. Yi Mulin pinched her face. Not angry anymore? I don't care, you have to deal with the broken shoes. She stared at him. Don't see AI Mulin in the future. Otherwise I won't be a bastard anymore. Yi Mulin looked at her little face that was flushed with anger, feeling angry and funny at the same time. He didn't say anything. He just played with her little face and trapped her by his side, not letting her go. He seemed to be thinking about something. After a long time he whispered, Xuelan, let's have a child, shall we? She lay on his lap, and her relaxed body suddenly became stiff. After a while she said softly, Yi Mulin, is it not enough for you to raise a rice worm? Do you want to raise another one? He pulled her hair. When the child is born, I will educate it myself. She blinked. You mean I can still continue to do my nails, beauty, go shopping and drink coffee? He hummed, which meant that he agreed. But soon he said, if it's a daughter, you can take care of it. Rice Worm couldn't believe what she heard. Did he mean to let his daughter develop as she pleased and let her raise her into a rice worm? She stared at him. Yi Mulin, you value boys more than girls. Actually, she had misunderstood. The men of the Yi family had a heavy burden on their shoulders. They were not allowed to neglect their duties, but it was different for girls. Yi Mulin had never felt that there was anything wrong with his wife's current state. She worshipped money and squandered the family fortune to give him a sense of achievement, right? Yi Mulin lowered his head to look at her and said slowly, there's nothing bad about a girl being like you. Her eyes widened. Yi Mulin, you admire me very much? Yi Mulin knocked her head. By Shuali, you think too much. Do you think I will appreciate a worm? Then why do you want our daughter to be like me? She said indignantly. Then he smiled, and it was a very meaningful smile. Does this mean that you also feel that it's not good for you to not make progress? She did not make a sound and hung her head low. She even looked a little cute. Yi Mulin sighed softly and reached out his hand to rub her gently. Actually, it's quite good for you to be like this. Didn't I say that you're highlighting the nobility of others? She was furious. Chapter 33:11. Of course she wasn't willing. She snorted, can't a daughter be raised to be an elite? She stole a glance at him. Yi Mulin smiled. Actually, he didn't mind spending time on children. It was just that he thought she would like girls like her. Moreover, he quite liked it too. He didn't really appreciate it in the past, but now he felt that it was quite good. If Bai Shuali was an elite woman, based on their conflict yesterday, he probably wouldn't be able to coax her even in a month. Moreover, he couldn't imagine himself coaxing a strong woman. She was just the way she was. He said, if you don't mind her looking down on you when she grows up, will you help me? Her voice was very soft. At that moment, Yi Mulin had to admit that he was touched by her cuteness. He said hoarsely, of course. With that said, he reached out and caressed her hair. It was the kind of warmth that didn't carry feelings. They had spent many nights in bed after their marriage, and he had always been wild and rough. Only this time was different. This time it seemed to be very different. Rice Worm bit her lips and whispered after a long time, "If it's a girl, are we still going to have more?" He reached out and pinched her cheeks, saying the truth, "We have to have 2 sons." The Yi family always had 2 sons to ensure the quality. However, he suspected that Bai Shuili would lower the standard. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to pick out the best even if he gave birth to one. However, he didn't say that out loud. Smart men wouldn't say that. At least for now. Bai Shuili stared at him for a long time before saying softly, "What if we can't give birth?" "If we can't give birth, we'll keep doing it until we do." He smiled. She lowered her head and suddenly felt that she had suffered a huge loss. It turned out that there were conditions for her to spend his money and enjoy all these. If she didn't get a divorce, she would have to have more than 2 sons with him. What if she couldn't give birth to a son? Would she be divorced? She wanted to ask but didn't. It was as if she really wanted to be a bastard. The 2 of them chatted for a long time before she whispered again, "I still can't forgive you." Yi Mulin finally tasted the fickleness of women. However, she was just saying it out loud. She couldn't forgive him in her heart, but she had already given in. If it was in the past, he probably would have looked down on such a spineless person, but she was Bai Shuili. She had been like this since she was young, and he also hated her for this. Now it seemed like he could tolerate her a little. No matter how hard she tried to forgive, she put on the necklace and the ring. Actually, she had a lot of jewelry, but after he bought her a necklace and a ring, she never took them off. When he put them on for her, he suddenly thought of something. So he looked up at her and smiled. "Rice Worm, you've liked me for a long time, haven't you?" "No." She was a little aloof. "What I like is your money." "Then why didn't you like other people's money?" "That means you still like me." A lawyer was a lawyer. In a few words he changed the topic. She rolled her eyes at him and kicked him. "I'm going to sleep. Also take care of your broken shoes. Otherwise you won't even have the chance to be a bastard." He reached out and touched his nose, not wanting to argue with her. After a while she fell asleep. He went to the study and personally called the Bai family to apologize to Bai Shuili's father. This kind of thing happened not only because of the relationship between him and the rice worm. There were many things involved. The slightest carelessness could cause turmoil in the Bai and Yi families. Chapter 33:12. Yi Mulin's phone call was not easy. For him, Father Bai was not only an elder but also a political ally of the Yi family. What happened between him and Ai Wei would definitely make Father Bai uncomfortable. However, Father Bai didn't blame him too much. He said lightly, "I believe you, Mulin. I know Shirley's character. She will call me crying when she is wronged. She has a bad personality. You should teach her more." He hung up after a few more words. Maybe he was really busy. Yi Mulin hung up the phone with a complicated feeling. His wife didn't call him crying. She just quarreled with him. Was it because in her heart she actually believed him? She was just angry that he hit her yesterday and that he didn't call her Miss Bai. Yi Mulin's heart was a little soft. This rarely happened in his life because of a woman. And it was his wife, the type he didn't appreciate at all. He smoked a cigarette and made a few more calls, including to his father. Compared with Father Bai's understatement, Father Yi seemed to be very cautious. He said a few words to Yi Mulin, "You must hold on to Shirley. Your relationship will be magnified in front of the media now. Any bad news will cause a big uproar. And Ai Wei, do you need me to do something?" Father Yi was not an ordinary person since he could sit in this position today. He should be cruel and have many tricks up his sleeves. Yi Mulin said lightly, "It has nothing to do with her. She didn't do it." In fact, they all knew that it must be the Yi family's political enemies who did it. Ai Wei was just a pawn among them. Father Yi was a little dissatisfied with his son's words. "Mulin, you are still too soft-hearted. On such a road there would always be innocent people involved. It was better to get rid of these troubles as soon as possible." Father Yi had high expectations for Mu Lin. Originally, he did not intend to let his 2 sons enter politics. Mu Bai could not be a celebrity, but Mu Lin was different. Mu Lin was a lawyer and had handled many important economic cases. He also had a lot of international connections. Moreover, he was in the country. Father Yi thought a little too much, but he didn't tell his son about it. It was not time yet. Yi Mulin hung up the phone and took out a document to read while smoking. He was indeed a very busy man. It was already very rare for him to spend the whole day at home with his wife. He was working at home. When he thought of the rice worm lying on the bed, he suddenly smiled. It seemed not bad. Later, he simply took the laptop to the master bedroom and sat on the sofa opposite the bed. From time to time, he would take out his phone and talk to Secretary Li. Rice Worm was sleeping soundly. His voice was low and hoarse, and he would look at her from time to time. At the law firm, Secretary Lee covered her ears. Her ears were burning. Boss's voice today was very magnetic, very hoarse, and very pleasant to listen to. Yi Mulin hung up the phone, looked at the Rice Worm again, and continued to read the documents. His phone lit up. It was AI Wei. AI Wei had called to interrogate him. The moment the call connected, she said, "Yi Mulin, there are photos of us online." Yi Mulin said calmly, "Lawyer AI, is this matter troubling you?" In fact, he had seen it too. It was nothing more than a picture of them sitting together drinking coffee. Chapter 33:13. AI Wei couldn't say anything since Yi Mulin was so casual. She hesitated. "See you the day after tomorrow." Yi Mulin hung up without saying anything. He looked up and saw that the girl sitting on the bed opposite him had woken up and was staring at him. He put down the phone and looked at the sky outside. "Are you up for dinner?" "No, I'm tired." She lay down again and hugged the quilt. "Yi Mulin, you didn't go to work today and made such a big noise. I don't want to go down for dinner." Yi Mulin smiled and put down everything in his hands. He walked to the bed. "Are you shy?" He even tried to touch her face, but she dodged. She glared at him. "Don't touch me. You're annoying." Yi Mulin smiled and didn't say anything. He let her lie down and went downstairs for dinner. After a while, the smell of food floated in from downstairs. It was so tempting that Ricky almost drooled. He was so hateful. He didn't even let her eat after a day of pleasure. The more she thought about it, the angrier she got. She wanted to smash the phone but didn't dare to. She sulked and smelled the smell of food, which made her even angrier. Downstairs, Mama Yi asked worriedly while eating, "Is Shirley still awake?" She stretched out her hand and patted her son, half reproachful and half happy. "Why don't you be gentler?" Yi Mulin smiled. "She's awake. She's angry." Mama Yi was shocked and looked at her son. "She's awake but you won't let her come downstairs for dinner?" Yi Mulin smiled again. "She's angry. She won't come down. I still have to coax her." Mama Yi was anxious and was about to go upstairs herself. Yi Mulin said calmly, "I'll cook for her later." Mama Yi froze. "What? You're going to cook?" Her eldest son had never cooked before. How could he say that he was going to cook for Shirley? Yi Mulin pretended that he didn't see his mother's expression. He went to the kitchen after dinner. He studied abroad and was good at cooking Western food. He made spaghetti and curry chicken and brought them upstairs. The smell was everywhere. Baishuali sat up and stared at him. "Is this for me?" "No, I ate it myself." He brought it to the sofa and smiled. "Aren't you angry?" She shouted angrily, "Even if I'm angry, I still have to eat." She didn't care. She climbed up and sat beside him without brushing her teeth. She snatched the fork from his hand and began to eat. The pure taste made her sigh with satisfaction. "Delicious." Then he looked at Yi Mulin and said, "The chef in your house is pretty good. He really knows how to enjoy life." Yi Mulin didn't fight with her. He leaned against the side and looked at her indifferently. Actually, a rice worm was very easy to satisfy. As long as he gave her food and bought her something she liked, she would be very obedient. When he was handling work, she would sleep. When he was eating, she would be angry, but she would not argue with him. It was quite easy to raise. His gaze was deep, but it contained a depth of affection that even he himself did not know. Perhaps he had been looking at her like this since she was 6 or 7 years old. It had been almost 20 years. Perhaps his hatred was just an excuse. An excuse that he couldn't bear to like such an idiot. He thought about it but didn't disturb her. He just kept his gaze on her face. Looking at her eating contentedly, he seemed to be satisfied too. Chapter 33:14. He thought of the time when he was with AI Wei. He looked at AI Wei and always convinced himself that he should like a woman with ideals. But when he looked at AI Wei's face, he thought of another face. She had a beautiful face, but she was stupid, ignorant, and incompetent. When she was very young, she only knew how to wear flowery dresses all day long. She was so shallow. Of course, she was still shallow now. She even became Yi Mulin's wife. Lawyer Yi gritted his teeth and thought. In fact, when Mu Bai and Bai Shueli's marriage broke down that day, Mu Bai would listen to him if he told him about the Yi family's life and death. Or maybe Mu Bai had already seen through his disguise, so he ran away from the wedding. Yi Mulin was a very smart person. He realized that Mu Bai was not the kind of person who would run away from the wedding. Why did he do that day? When he understood, he chuckled softly and it was a joyful laugh. In fact, Millet Worm was abandoned by Mu Bai and he happened to pick her up. He thought and reached out to pull her hair. Will you be obedient in the future? He was excited to get a new toy in his heart, but he didn't show it on his face. He still liked to bully her as before. Bai Shueli stared at him while eating. You are so hateful. She didn't want to listen to him. As soon as she finished speaking, he took away the food in her hand. If you don't listen to me, you won't get to eat. Millet Worm stared at him. Aunt Gue prepared this for me, not yours. I made it, he said lightly. She almost choked and stopped to look at him. You made it? She couldn't believe it. Yi Mulin sneered. Yes, I made it. Do you still want to eat it? She bit her lips. Yes. That pitiful look made his heart soften, but he was amused and angry at the same time. If you want to eat it, just call me. He thought for a moment and looked at her deeply. In fact, he wanted her to call him Mulin just like how she called Mu Bai instead of calling him Mulin and Mulin every day. He didn't mention it, so he didn't expect that she would directly call him husband. In the past, he didn't care when other women called him husband. He always thought that a husband and wife should keep some distance between them. It was okay at night, but they couldn't be too intimate during the day. But now she called him husband. Yi Mulin was really electrocuted. He looked at her. His gaze was calm, but his heart was full of lust. Come here. The voice was extremely cold. Rice Bug moved a little closer to him and secretly picked up a fork to eat a mouthful of curry chicken. He accidentally saw it. Yi Mulin's gaze was unfathomable. Then he said in an especially calm voice, Go brush your teeth. What? I didn't finish it, she said unhappily. Then she boldly and shamelessly sat on his lap and continued to eat. Her chin was grabbed by him, and the piece of curry chicken in her hand fell to the carpet. She looked at him blankly and stammered, Yi Mulin, what's wrong? Go brush your teeth. His voice suddenly became hoarse. I don't really like the taste of curry. I like it and I'm the one eating it, not you, she said angrily. Yi Mulin's gaze deepened. His voice was low and hoarse. I'm going to eat too. She bit her lips. Don't you like the taste? I'll try it. After saying that, he held her waist with one hand and pinched her chin with the other. He directly pried open her lips and tasted the curry with her. Bai Shueli's eyes widened. He kissed her before she even brushed her teeth. Didn't he think it was dirty? Chapter 33:15. But not only did he not dislike it, he was also very engrossed. This kiss lasted for a very, very long time. When he let go of her, Rice Worm said hesitantly, Well, the food seems to be cold. At this moment, she did not know that his heart was boiling. She whispered in a very hoarse voice, Bai Shueli, do you like me? Rice Worm was stunned and then looked at him as if he was sick. After a while, she asked him in a low voice, Do you have a fever? His eyes were locked on her. I am serious. She stuttered a little and after a long time she spat out a few words, I like you. I like your money. He looked a little disappointed and then smiled, You only like money? Rice Worm lowered her head and looked at the coffee chicken pitifully, I still like your chicken. Yi Mulin was stunned for a moment. Then he could not help but laugh out loud. His laughter was deep and heavy. He said, Okay, he said Bai Shueli, remember what you said. Rice Worm did not understand. She only said that the chicken he made was delicious, not his chicken. Suddenly she opened her eyes and stared at him. He was too shameless. Yi Mulin chuckled and returned her food to her. He even touched her head, delicious chicken. Then he went to brush his teeth. He was still a little disgusted with the taste of curry. Rice Worm looked at his back. She still could not figure out what was wrong with him today. Did he feel very sorry for her? But she did not dare to flatter herself. He had always hated her and despised her. There was the sound of water in the bathroom. She snorted. He despised her even when kissing her. When Yi Mulin came out of the bathroom, she had already finished the food. He smiled faintly and did not say anything. He just cleaned up and patted her. Go and wash up. Bai Shueli looked up. Yi Mulin, we are still in a cold war. He turned his head and looked at her angry face, then smiled. Whatever, do what you want. After saying that, he walked out, looking as if he would let her do whatever she wanted. Bai Shueli was so angry that she wanted to hit him with a pillow. It was really her illusion. How could he like her? He just wanted to tease her, not like her. At the door, Yi Mulin shook his head and walked downstairs. When they came down again, she went to take a shower and he sat on the sofa in a daze. This was very rare for the eldest son of the Yi family. She came out and he told her to come and sit down. Bai Shueli dried her hair and looked at him warily. In the end she still sat down. He took the towel from her and dried her hair, but his actions were obviously absent-minded. Bai Shuali stared at him silently. Their argument over AI Wei seemed to have disappeared. He coaxed her a few times and it seemed to have disappeared after a few times. At this moment he seemed to be thinking about something else. It was something very important to him. At first, Bai Shuali was still trying to figure out what he was thinking about. Later on she felt a little tired. In addition, she didn't have enough brain capacity, so she stopped thinking about it. Thus, she laid on his lap and tried to sleep with her eyes half closed. Yi Mulin dried his hair for a long time, but he was actually lost in thought. After a long time he said in a low voice, "Let's move out, huh?" Bai Shuali was confused at first, but then she opened her eyes and stared at him. Move out. Chapter 33:16. She lay on his lap. It was actually quite comfortable. She opened her eyes and looked at him quietly. Why? Yi Mulin threw the towel aside and used his fingers to help her straighten her hair. He whispered, "You don't like living here, do you?" Rice Worm changed his position. "Will there be servants if we live alone?" "We live in an apartment. There are no servants." His face darkened. She looked at him helplessly. "Do you mean I have to wash my own clothes, cook my own meals and clean my own house?" He reached out to hold her chin. "Shouldn't you do all these yourself?" But we don't need it." She wanted to be bold and confident, but under his gaze she seemed to lack confidence. "We can still hire someone to do it. How about we live here?" She thought quickly and found a good reason. "I like my mother very much. I think I can learn a lot from her." "You just like her to wash your clothes for you?" Yi Mulin sneered and held her chin, as if he would break her little neck if she dared to lie. Bai Shuali was speechless. She could not say anything for a long time. After a long time she asked in a low voice, "Have you decided or are you asking for my opinion? Is there a difference?" His voice was cold. She shrank her neck and thought of something after a long time. "Yi Mulin, shouldn't you be coaxing me? I'm still angry. You can't do this to me." He looked at her as if she was an idiot. It seemed a little late to think of it now. She protested, "I want to live here. I have decided." He said unexpectedly, "I will take you to work tomorrow. You don't need to move your things there. As for your," he pondered for a moment, "I will buy you new things." She stared at him. She had to buy everything she needed for at least a month. Would he have time to accompany her? But thinking about it, she thought that Yi Mulin would accompany her for a month. Then she asked in a low voice, "I want to come back on Saturday and Sunday. At least 2 days a week someone would take care of her." She thought of eating takeout every day and her face turned bitter. "Let's live here. It is good. I can learn to be a good wife and a good mother." Yi Mulin's fingers gently touched her red lips. "Do you want to be a mother?" She nodded vigorously. Now that she was pregnant, he probably wouldn't let her do any more manual labor, right? She should be resting by now, right? Thinking of this, Yi Mulin smiled softly. "Then let's do something so that you can be a mother." As he spoke, he carried her towards the large bed. Bai Shuali was stunned. Weren't they just talking about serious matters? Why did he suddenly have eyes? She punched him. "You've done it several times today. How was this man abstinence?" He clearly didn't know how to control himself. He was like this in the mansion. They lived alone and he didn't give her anything to eat or drink. He tortured her like this every night. She would definitely be sucked dry by him. Just thinking about it made Rice Worm feel gloomy. Therefore, when Yi Mulin invited her to have breakfast with him the next morning, she was in a daze. Mama Yi was very concerned. "Mulin surely doesn't seem to be feeling well. Do you want to take her to the hospital later?" Chapter 33:17. A little late to bed? This was a lot of information. Even Yi Mulin's mother, who was experienced, couldn't help but blush. This son was too explicit. However, there was something more explicit. Yi Mulin paused and said slowly, "Shirley and I won't be coming back tonight." At this time, Rice Worm looked at Mama Yi reluctantly. He said he wants to move out. "Mama, I think it's good here." Mama Yi's mood was quite complicated. Her son obviously wanted to take his little wife out. He was probably enlightened. But what about Shirley? Yi Mulin was right. She just wanted to stay here and live the life of a rice worm. There's nothing wrong with that. Mama Yi was in a dilemma. Bai Shirley looked at Yi Mulin secretly and whispered, "Mama, can I stay here?" That softness was something Mama Yi had never enjoyed before. She only had 2 sons and had never had such a soft little thing act like a spoiled child to her. Although she knew it was because she wanted something from her as a carefree mother, her heart was still incredibly soft. She wanted to say yes, but it was not appropriate for her to intervene in the affairs of a young couple. Her son was not to be trifled with. Mama Yi looked at her youngest daughter-in-law and could only reluctantly give up. Well, it's the same if you come back for dinner on Saturday and Sunday. Mama. Rice Worm was very disappointed. She didn't want to wash clothes or cook. Her hands would become rough. Then Yi Mulin would not like her and find a mistress outside. The more she thought about it, the more scared she was, but she dared not resist. In front of Mama Yi she always spoke softly. Mama Yi glanced at her son and smiled lightly. You are not allowed to bully Shirley. You can't force her to do things she doesn't like. She doesn't know how to wash clothes. As for cooking, she thought for a moment, I'll ask the servants to go every day at noon. This pair of rice worms were really spoiled. Even Rice Worm was a little flattered. Even her mother was not as meticulous as this. But after a long time Yi Mulin just said lightly, Mama, don't send anyone. I will take good care of her. Rice Worm broke out in a cold sweat when she heard this. Why did she have a bad feeling about this? Yi Mulin wiped his lips and looked at his wife. Are you done? She pursed her lips. You are in a hurry to go to work. You can pick me up at night. As long as she could stay here, she would stay for another day. Yi Mulin's voice was very light. You don't like my office? She was stunned. What did he mean? However, she soon realized that he was driving to his law firm, not his high-class apartment. Bai Shuali cried out, Yi Mulin, what are you doing? I don't have time to accompany you during the day. Come to my office. He paused. Otherwise, I'm afraid you'll starve to death. She lowered her head and of to say, I don. Last time they had been so fierce at his place. Moreover, she had said that whoever turned back was a bastard. She did not want to be a bastard. Of course, Yi Mulin knew what she was thinking. He softened his voice. I have a gift to give you. It's a big gift. Don't you want it? Her eyes lit up, but she quickly suppressed it. She didn't want to appear greedy. Her voice was restrained. Actually, you don't have to spend money. I am not such a shallow person. Chapter 33:18. After she said that, Lawyer Yi turned to look at her with a smile in his eyes. Bai Shuali, you're not such a shallow person. Did I hear wrongly? Yes, how am I shallow? I'm outstanding too. Her voice was small and there was a hint of dissatisfaction in it. Yi Mulin held back his laughter and murmured after a while, yes, it depends on the person. He thought that if she was outstanding it might be good for others, but for him she wasn't outstanding. What attracted him, made him hate and liked her was her superficiality, her stupidity and her inability to do anything. If she knew everything and was perfect in everything, she wouldn't be any different from others to him. She would just be another AI way. Yi Mulin held the steering wheel and suddenly smiled. The corners of his mouth were slightly raised and he looked pleasing to the eye. At least in Bai Shuali's eyes, it was pleasing to the eye at this moment. He was really annoying and good-looking. Bai Shuali looked at him and her heart suddenly jumped. Then she pretended to turn her face to the side, but she couldn't help looking at him after a while. Even if he was good-looking, he was annoying. She ignored him and then forced herself not to look at him. Yi Mulin, on the other hand, would occasionally look at her. He saw her fuming with anger and saw her pouting her lips. It was quite cute. He smiled, held the steering wheel and focused on driving. When they were downstairs, the subordinates in the law firm were so excited that they were about to jump. Because the bastard was coming. They just didn't know who would be the bastard between Lawyer Yi and Mrs. Yi. Everyone was inexplicably excited until the door opened. Although Bai Shuali was a worm and she had lost face here last time, she felt that she had given him a slap in the face last time. She had also thrown some harsh words at him. This time he was the one who begged her to come, so it would be fine for her to put on airs. Besides, didn't he prepare a gift for her? So she felt that he should be the bastard. When she came in, everyone looked at her, especially Secretary Li, who was a little excited. Yi Mulin glanced at his secretary and coughed. Where's the gift I prepared? Secretary Li's heart skipped a beat. Lawyer Yi, it's on your desk. Give it to Mrs. Yi, he said, looking at Bai Shuali. The rice worm raised its head proudly. Secretary Li glanced at her. Afraid of her superior's authority, she still went to get it. It was a small transparent box filled with water, and inside it was a small tortoise. Secretary Li handed it over to Yi Mulin, then quickly ran away. Yi Mulin picked up the small box and smiled at the pale Bai Shuali. This is for you. It's called Little White. Take good care of it. Xiaobai. Her surname was Bai. Bai Shuali was furious. This bastard, didn't he just call her a bastard? I don't want it. She refused to take it. Unless it changes its name to Xiao Mumu. Yi Mulin's gaze was a little deep. He reached out and took out the little tortoise. He pulled her hand over and placed it on her palm. Are you sure you don't want it? It's very cute. Bai Shuali was startled and flung it away with a cry. The little tortoise fell to the ground, with his limbs facing the sky. He looked very pitiful. Chapter 33:19. Bai Shuali stared at him. He smiled again. Your decision? Yi Mulin, you're not an idiot, are you? You're a bastard. After a long time she finally managed to speak. She felt pity for the little tortoise, so she squatted down and picked it up. It was only the size of an egg. Its small head shrank immediately. It was quite cute. She thought that it was similar to her. It should be the age to be arrogant, but it had to behave with its tail between its legs. No, it was just a tortoise with its tail between its legs. Thinking about it, it was like they were in the same boat. Xiao Mumu, I will take care of you from now on. You will be my rice worm. She meant something. Yi Mulin glanced at her and didn't argue with her. Bai Shuali put Xiao Mumu into the small box and walked in front with her chin up. After thinking for a while, she turned around and said to Boss Ye's subordinates, from now on, you must call Xiao Mumu young master. He is your young master's son. Secretary Gao raised his hand. The tortoise is a female. The rice worm was embarrassed and coughed. Call her miss. However, she felt something was wrong immediately. It was a female. It was a female. Secretary Gao said kindly, Boss asked me to buy a female one. Bai Shuali stared at the female tortoise in her hand and was furious. Yi Mulin, you bastard. You don't like it? Just throw it away if you don't like it. Yi Mulin looked at her coldly, took the box from her hand and threw it into the trash can. Clean and neat. She was stunned. Then tears gathered in her eyes. Yi Mulin, you hurt the little animal. Yi Mulin, you don't care about life. Yi Mulin, you have no love. Facing her accusation, Lawyer Yi just looked at the struggling tortoise coldly. It is still alive. But whether it can live or not depends on your luck. Here are all cold-blooded lawyers like me who don't care about life and don't care about small animals. So no one saved it except its own kind. Tortoise and rice worm. He said viciously. Not only Bai Shuali was furious, but also his subordinates were stunned. Although Lawyer Yi was eloquent, he had never argued with a little girl like this. Last night, the lawyer would have said that such behavior was childish and ridiculous. He would have said that it was disgraceful and a waste of life. Was the man who was wasting his life Lawyer Yi? Yi Mulin glanced at his subordinates. Everyone went back to work, only daring to sneak a peek at Bai Shuali. The rice worm was really struggling. In the past, she wouldn't even pick up a Hermes that cost more than 1,000,000 yuan, let alone a little bastard that cost more than 10 yuan. She took a few hesitant steps. If it died, then so be it. Anyway, this kind of small animal was worthless and there were many of them on Earth. After taking a few steps, she stopped again. However, there was only one little tortoise named Xiao Mumu, and she was the one who came up with the name. Pick it up. How bad would it be for her, Bai Shuali, to pick up things from the garbage? If word of this got out, how would she be able to face anyone? But if he didn't pick it up, what if it died? He snorted and said to those who were watching the show, all of you turn your backs. Her voice was arrogant and as usual Bai Shuali's. His subordinates all turned their backs to him, but they were all secretly laughing. Actually, the boss's wife was very cute. She had the most open appearance but had the temper of a teenager. No wonder the boss had become childish. Birds of a feather flock together, this saying was not wrong at all. Chapter 33:20. Bai Shuali looked around and carefully bent down to pick up the little tortoise. It was a female. She stared at it. Why couldn't she see that it was a female? Xiao Mumu. She frowned and carefully put the little tortoise into the box. Then she followed Yi Mulin into his office. Yi Mulin was already sitting behind the desk dealing with business. His coat was thrown on the sofa casually. Inside was a light blue shirt and a dark tie of the same color. It was very pleasing to the eye. Bai Shuali walked to him and he looked up at her. She snorted and put the little tortoise in front of him. Yi Mulin was going to make a phone call. Now he put down the phone and looked at the little tortoise and its mother. Have you decided to raise it? Bai Shuali snorted. Where should I raise it? He smiled. You're its mother. You can decide. You don't have to ask me about such a small matter. I'm not its mother. Rice Worm was angry. Its name is Xiao Mumu. It's Xiao Bai. As Yi Mulin spoke, he took out his checkbook and scribbled down a bunch of numbers. 20 million. Name it. Is there any problem? She wanted to refuse, but she hesitated when she looked at the check. It was a very tempting set of numbers. She bit her lip and still wanted the check. However, Yi Mulin didn't let her touch it. He looked at her and smiled. Call me Xiao Bai. Rice Worm stared at him. Then she called him unwillingly, Xiao Bai. He looked at her and put the check in her palm. He said meaningfully, take care of our baby, okay? He took out a book from the drawer. This is the Encyclopedia of Turtle Rearing. Take a good look. Bai Shuali reached out to take it and said, we have a child now. Do we have to increase our living expenses a little? He looked at her. 500,000. So little? She was not satisfied. Yi Mulin sneered. If you give birth to one yourself, I'll add 10 million a month. But it has to be my child. She blushed under such straightforwardness. Yi Mulin looked at her and pointed at the little box on the table. Take this thing away and play in the lounge. She refused. This is our baby. Smiling, he said, your seed. His face darkened again. Yi Mulin, if you have the ability, ask the security guards to chase me away, or call me Miss Bai. She wasn't afraid of him. She took out Little White to play with and even made faces at him. She really looked a little childish. He was both angry and amused at the same time. There was nothing he could do about it. In the end, he allowed her to stay in the office with Xiao Bai. Bai Shuali placed Little White in front of him and went to read the Encyclopedia of How to Raise Tortoises. The office was quiet. It was very harmonious. Yi Mulin was busy with his work. After a while, he looked at the little tortoise, then looked at the tortoise's mother, and a smile appeared on his lips. That idiot was so stupid. He was actually reading the Encyclopedia of Tortoises. He thought that when Little White grew up, he would hide it from her and tell her that it had been stewed. She would definitely cry her heart out and then he would take it out. At that time, her expression would be especially interesting. Just thinking about it made Yi Mulin feel that it was very interesting. At this time, Secretary Li knocked on the door and came in. Lawyer Yi, she looked at Bai Shuali, who was sprawled on the sofa, and hesitated. Lawyer AI is here. Do you want to meet her? Bai Shuali raised her head and looked at Yi Mulin instinctively. There was a flash of hurt in her eyes. Chapter 33:21. Yi Mulin put down the document in his hand and looked at his wife with a smile. Do you think I should see her? Secretary Li at the door was shocked. Lawyer Yi was so democratic now? She looked at Mrs. Yi again. Bai Shuali snorted and continued to look at the book in her hand. I can't control Lawyer Yi. Yi Mulin chuckled and looked at Secretary Li. Let Lawyer AI in. After saying that, he looked at the rice worm and the corner of his mouth turned down. How dare you say you don't care? He smiled, unbuttoned his cufflinks and put them on the table, then rolled up his sleeves a little. The rice worm stared at him, almost suffocating. He was so hateful. He wanted to see her, but he still wanted to seduce her. Did he show his flesh for AI Wei to see? No. She took the book and ran over to sit on his lap. Then she tore off his tie and threw it on the desk. She even unbuttoned 3 buttons, messed up his hair, and nibbled on his ear, leaving a red mark. He let her do whatever she wanted and looked down at her after she finished. Finished? Then she tried to move away, but she had only moved a little when she was held down by a certain someone. Then he kissed her inhumanely deeply. The boss of the Yi family seemed to have never kissed her like this before. The kiss was fierce and deep, but his palm held the back of her head so gently. He would rub her scalp from time to comfort her, as if he was coaxing a child. She struggled at the beginning but then became obedient. She put her arms around his neck and gently called his name, Yi Mulin? He looked up and laughed in a low voice. That's more convincing. He kissed her again and patted her. Go play somewhere else. Her whole body was soft, and there was a layer of mist in her eyes, which looked very attractive. She pursed her lips and said in a low voice, My legs are sore. Yi Mulin smiled, the kind of smile that belonged to an adult man. He stretched out his slender fingers and touched her slightly swollen lips. I didn't really touch you. How can my legs be sore? I just can't walk. She lay in his arms. If you don't hug me, I'll let your old man see what we look like now. Was this a threat from the rice worm? Yi Mulin chuckled. At this moment AI Wei came in. She was supposed to come tomorrow, but she came early. She admitted that she was a little impatient, but Yi Mulin was worth it. But as soon as she entered, she was stunned. A woman was sitting on Yi Mulin's lap. He looked very intimate, which proved what they had been doing earlier. The woman's back view was very beautiful. Her long hair was spread over her shoulders, and her beige knitted top was pulled up to her shoulders, revealing a very fair skin that was so fair that it was glowing. He likes this kind of woman? Ai Wei had never thought that Yi Mulin was a promiscuous man, but it was obvious that he was. In broad daylight he was able to do this with a woman in the office. He was skilled and mature. This woman is a secretary in the office? Lawyer? Or was it a woman he found outside? Ai Wei thought bitterly. Was it because she was too insensitive in the past and didn't take the initiative? Did he like women who took the initiative? Just as she was guessing, Yi Mulin looked up and saw her. He patted the worm on his body and said, "Shueli, come down." Chapter 33:22. Yi Mulin lowered his head and stared at her vengeful little face. He chuckled. "If you don't come down, I'll call you a little bastard." For the sake of face, Rice Worm had no choice but to get down from his lap. She flipped her hair and ran to the sofa. Ai Wei didn't want to lower herself, so she didn't look at her. She only knew that she was a woman with a good figure. She just stared at Yi Mulin. He looked terrible. He didn't look like the elite he used to. Ai Wei didn't feel good in her heart. At this time Yi Mulin tidied himself up and said, "Shirley, go to the lounge. I have something to say to Lawyer Ai." "Shirley? By Shueli?" Ai Wei was stunned. She couldn't help but look to the side. The person who was lying on the sofa and reading was none other than Bai Shueli. Didn't they have a bad relationship? How did they reconcile so quickly? And it wasn't an act. Bai Shueli's lips were swollen from kissing. As a rival in love, Ai Wei took a good look at Bai Shueli's appearance. Today Bai Shueli's makeup was very light, almost no makeup. Her skin was very good and fair. Her eyes weren't very bright but they were very big. Her eyebrows were also light, and her nose was straight. However, her lips were very beautiful and full. As a woman, Ai Wei also thought of the words suitable for kissing. She looked at her with jealousy and then looked at Yi Mulin. "Lawyer Yi, did I disturb you?" "Not really." He had tidied himself up and even put on his tie. He looked like an elite again. However, the visual impact just now was too great. Ai Wei still felt that his whole body was full of male hormones. She licked her lips and watched Bai Shueli turn over lazily and continue to lie on the sofa. She didn't have any intention of leaving. Yi Mulin raised his voice a little. "Shirley, I think this sofa is very comfortable. It's even more comfortable than your legs. Why don't you and Lawyer Ai go to the lounge to talk?" She said childishly. She didn't care about the occasion. She just wanted to feel good. Yi Mulin's face darkened. He now felt that it was a mistake to bring her to the office. She never cared about anything else except that he was her man. Suddenly he smiled, and it was a rather indulgent smile. He reached out to adjust his tie, using his eyes to indicate Ai Wei to sit down. He then carried the little turtle over to her, squatted down and said rather patiently, "You've been reading for so long, shouldn't you try it out? Go find Secretary Li. She has some food for turtle." Feet. Rice Worm frowned. "You want little white to eat this? What else?" He glanced at a certain part of her body, but the stupid worm did not notice. She scoffed, "Xiaobai is your daughter." Yi Mulin nodded in agreement. "Breastfeeding is advocated now, but Bai Shueli, do you have it?" What breastfeeding? What was he talking about? Rice Worm's face immediately turned red. She also noticed where he was looking at and immediately covered her chest. "Yi Mulin, you're too shameless." He smiled calmly and said, "If you don't want to feed it yourself, go to Secretary Li. Call the insider and ask her to send it in." She pouted. "My legs are sore." "It's all your fault that you insisted on doing it here." Cleverly, he did not continue. The space of imagination was limitless. Chapter 33:23. Yi Mulin's answer was to carry Bai Shueli straight out of the room. The group of junior lawyers outside were all stunned. God, the boss's boyfriend power was off the charts. But wait, Lawyer Ai Wei just went in. The boss's choice was clear. Between a strong woman and a cow, a man still liked a cow. Yi Mulin carried her out. Rice Worm thought that he was going to leave her in the secretary's office and was furious. However, Yi Mulin just took Xiao Bai's food and carried her back to the office. He whispered as he walked, "Are you proud now, Mrs. Yi?" Rice Worm's heart was already bubbling with joy as he carried her around, but she still said in a reserved manner, "That's it, it's just so." She had to say it was sweet if he gave her a date. She didn't care about her pride. However, she still hugged her husband's neck tightly and let him carry her. Yimulin really spoiled her today. This time he carried her to the lounge and closed the door. If you come out again, I'll be rough. His eyes told her that it wasn't as simple as hitting her butt. She snorted and blushed. He reached out and touched her face gently, saying hoarsely, "You still owe me a beating. Have you forgotten?" He was talking about the time when they bought the bracelet. She promised to help him with that. Actually, they had been married for so long and he had always been the one who took the initiative. At first he was rough. Later, he wanted to do something different, but he was worried about her and couldn't bear to force her. Today she was so hateful and they moved out. Naturally, he had different thoughts. Actually, AI Wei was right. No matter how abstinent a man was, he would have no integrity when he met the woman he wanted. Hearing his words, Rice Worm's face turned even redder. She ran away with Xiaobai. Yimulin's gaze was deep. He looked at her for a while before opening the door and leaving. AI Wei, who was in the office, used all her strength to not lose her composure. She said bitterly, "Does Lawyer Yi spoil his wife like this? She is much younger than us. My mother told me to give in to her," he said lightly. "I was too strict with her in the past." AI Wei almost suffocated. What did he mean by much younger than us? Although AI Wei was 32 years old, she always took good care of herself. She didn't look like she was over 30. That Bai Shueli with one look was obviously a spoiled brat. She was the type that couldn't take hardship and relied on her father and men to live. She said sourly, "I didn't expect you to like such a woman." Yimulin frowned. "Shueli? No, Shueli is still a child. Shueli is still a child. Shueli is 26 years old. She wasn't that young either. She was only 8 or 9 years younger than Yimulin." AI Wei AI Yi smiled reluctantly. "Yunyi," she said. "Li Suis, Mulin." "Yi." He smiled casually. "I'm sorry for the trouble I've caused you, Lawyer AI. Shirley and I will treat you to lunch at noon. I wonder, would you do us the honor?" AI Wei originally wanted to refuse. She was a proud and capable woman, but she was a little unwilling. She thought that perhaps a meal could let Yi Mulin see the gap between her and Bai Shueli. So she agreed. But she had never thought that the gap between her and Bai Shueli was nothing else but family background. That was the biggest gap between them. The Yi family would never accept a woman with no background. Even if she was extremely capable, it would be useless. Chapter 33-24. AI Wei agreed and Yi Mulin started to talk business with her. He wasn't a man who would waste time, nor was he a lawyer who would waste time. He used every second just right. AI Wei was working with him in a pleasing manner. In her heart, this man was perfect. However, he was married and he didn't belong to her. She could only look at him carefully through business. She would also make things difficult for him because his eyes would stay on her face for a little longer, even if it was just for a second. AI Wei felt a little bitter in her heart. But at the same time, she was a strong woman. Even if he was married, she still felt that she had a chance because his wife wasn't good enough. She talked with Yi Mulin for about 2 hours about the billion-dollar company. She almost broke down. She didn't have the energy to look at him and think about other things. At this time, Yi Mulin stopped talking. AI Wei, let's call it a day. He raised his hand to look at the time. It's already 11. AI Wei smiled. It's lunchtime, right? She thought bitterly that if it was just them without Bai Shueli, it would be a wonderful lunch. But Yi Mulin nodded lightly and walked to the door of the lounge. When he opened the door, a sad voice came from inside. "Honey, I'm hungry." Then the rice worm hugged his waist and buried her face in his mouth. Xiaobai is hungry too. She even raised her eyes and looked at him playfully. She acted coquettishly and naturally. AI Wei sat there, dignified and elegant. She thought to herself, was this why Yi Mulin liked Bai Shueli? Superficial acting coquettishly was just like those girls nowadays. They thought they were cute, but they were actually very funny. Sorry she couldn't do it. On the other side, Yi Mulin looked at his rice worm. Although he knew that she was acting, he still felt it was a little funny. "Let's go eat and," he turned around and introduced her solemnly. "My junior in New York, AI Wei." He looked at AI Wei again. "My wife, Bai Shueli." AI Wei stood up and walked over slowly. She stretched out her hand politely and looked at Yi Mulin. "Where does Miss Bai work?" Yi Mulin smiled and looked at the rice worm. Bai Shueli said confidently, "I don't have a job for the time being. I might have to have 2 children before I find a job." AI Wei nodded understandingly. "Understood." It's hard being Mulan's wife. He's always busy. Bai Shueli ignored her and reached out to hug Yi Mulan's arm. Hubby, are we eating with lawyer AI? Aren't you going to hire those subordinates of yours? Isn't that a little too harsh? Yi Mulan smiled. It's a private dinner today. AI Wei couldn't help but ask, Miss Bai, do you know how much it costs to eat a high-class meal for dozens of people? This is B City, China. Why do we need to use US dollars? Bai Shueli looked puzzled. And no matter how expensive it is, we can still afford it. AI Wei sneered in her heart, but she still maintained a polite smile on her face. As long as Mu Lin is happy. Bai Shueli looked at Yi Mulan. Are you unhappy? Yi Mulan held her hand seriously. Let's go. Chapter 33-25. Bai Shueli didn't find that Yi Mulan was actually very tall until she didn't wear high heels. He was probably a head taller than her. He was definitely more than 185. She looked at his hand holding hers, bit her lip, but still reached out to hold his hand tightly. This scene made AI Wei's eyes dim. He should give up. His choice was actually quite obvious. It was the aesthetic of a straight man. But as a woman with self-esteem, AI Wei couldn't accept losing to such a bad woman, so she didn't want to give up. Such a threesome naturally attracted the attention of all the staff in the office. Compared with the first time AI Wei came, Lawyer Ye's attitude changed greatly. This time he stood firmly by Mrs. Ye's side. In fact, the minions also thought that Mrs. Ye's figure was better. She was hot when she was sexy, but now she was as amiable as the girl next door when she didn't put on makeup. Both of them made men relax. On the contrary, Lawyer AI was also very beautiful, but she was sharp in a suit and sharp in a party in an evening dress. In short, if they were in the same profession, Lawyer Ye's nerves would probably be tense all the time, feeling that he would have to negotiate at any time. If they had to choose, they would also choose a beautiful little vase that was pleasing to the eye, cute and easy to bully. They couldn't imagine the scene of Lawyer Yi bullying Lawyer AI. When the three of them walked to the door, Bai Shueli suddenly bit her lower lip. Will Little White starve to death? Yi Mulan said immediately, don't think about taking him to the restaurant. And the turtle can be fed once every 2 or 3 days. If you feed him too much, he will die. She said, oh, and felt that it was a pity. Actually, she quite liked Little White. The chosen restaurant was a bit far from here. AI Wei drove by himself and Yi Mulan brought his wife. They arrived at the French restaurant in less than 10 minutes. In the car, Bai Shueli had tied her long hair into a braid and placed it casually in front of her. In addition, the clothes she was wearing were quite fresh. She sat next to Yi Mulan and when he asked, she asked him to order for her. AI Wei took a sip of water and smiled lightly. Miss Bai, why don't you go out for a walk? Bai Shueli took Yi Mulan's aperitif and played with it in her hand. What does Lawyer AI mean by going out for a walk mean? Studying abroad. AI Wei was a straightforward person, so she quickly answered. Bai Shueli let out a long "oh" before nodding her head. I'm not good at my studies, so I've never thought of going abroad. Besides, I like China. It's so much fun in China, why must I go abroad? Is the moon rounder there? AI Wei couldn't communicate for a while. She had worked in the company in San Francisco for several years and didn't want to come back for the time being, unless the man sitting opposite her hinted to her to come back. When she came back this time, she heard the news of his marriage. AI smiled faintly. I don't know if the moon outside is round or not, but I don't want to sit at the bottom of a well and look at the moon. Bai Shueli let out another long "oh," and said in a rather admiring tone, Lawyer AI is so independent. She tilted her head and looked at Yi Mulan. Her voice was soft. What about you? Are you willing to go out with me? Why don't we postpone having children for a few years? Don't mess around. Yi Mulan looked at the menu and gently knocked her head. I'll be 40 in a few years. Bai Shueli quickly glanced at him and blushed slightly. Chapter 33-26. Bai Shueli picked up the wine glass and took a sip to cover herself. But she choked. This was a high-class restaurant, so it was uncomfortable to hold it in. Yi Mulan quickly noticed it. He had a helpless and indulgent expression on his face. Drink some water to calm it down. Bai Shueli quickly drank some water to feel better. She frowned at him. What kind of aperitif is this? It tastes strange. He saw that she was fine and continued to order. He lowered his head and smiled faintly. You are not allowed to drink it in the future. The rice worm did not say anything. He ordered for himself and Bai Shueli. He gave the menu to AI Wei. You order yourself. AI Wei actually wanted him to order for her, but she could not say anything now. She took the French menu and used fluent French to communicate with the waiter. She ordered whatever she wanted. The restaurant was high class and the waiter was beautiful, but he did not speak French. The waiter was confused and could not speak for a long time. AI Wei kept her head down and didn't notice the waiter's embarrassment. Yi Mulin wanted to help, but his rice worm had already whispered AI Wei's order to the waiter. His voice was soft and gentle, and the waiter immediately memorized it. Then Millet Worm felt her husband holding her hand. She looked at him and struggled but could not break free. He nonchalantly picked up the apéritif with his other hand and elegantly took 2 sips. AI Wei closed the menu and looked at Bai Shueli. She was slightly surprised. Didn't you never study abroad? Bai Shueli took Yi Mulin's apéritif to play with as she said casually, I hired a tutor. At most, the family hired more than 10 tutors in different languages, so I know about 7 or 8 languages. However, it is limited to eating, drinking, and playing. I don't know anything professional. In reality, 7 or 8 countries was already very powerful, even if it was just eating, drinking, and playing. Yi Mulin knew a bit more. He always knew that the Bai family raised Bai Shueli according to the standards of a princess, but he did not think that they would raise a rice worm that only knew how to eat, drink, and play. He himself did not expect that he would raise this precious rice worm. It was actually quite expensive to raise her, but he seemed to be very happy so far, and he was happier every day. Especially when she spoke to the waiter in a soft and small voice, he especially enjoyed it. Just looking at her small face, he had an urge to take her home, press her on his bed and harshly bully her. In this world there was a kind of woman who was born to be pampered by men. They were raised at home like his mother, like his rice worm and Little White. The eldest of the Yi clan had never had a child before, but now he actually had the feeling of having a wife and daughter. He himself felt that it was somewhat inconceivable. Hearing his words, AI Wei only smiled. At that moment she didn't know where her stockings were hooked. She squatted down to take a look, but the moment she squatted down she realized that Yi Mulin was holding Bai Shueli's hand under the table. Bai Shueli seemed to find him annoying and always wanted to break free, but he always had a way to catch her. AI Wei blinked and thought bitterly, so he really likes this woman. She did not understand why he liked a woman that only knew how to eat, drink, and play. Where was his ambition and revenge? Was it all going to be wasted on this woman? When AI Wei raised her eyes again, she pretended not to see anything. She smiled faintly, I'm going to the bathroom. Bai Shueli watched her leave and said to Yi Mulin, I want to go as well. Chapter 33:27. She looked at him and nodded. Then she walked towards the washroom. As a female, she understood AI Wei's call. Who was afraid of who? She was Mrs. Yi, and she and Yi Mulin even had the fruit of love. Bai Shueli walked into the washroom. AI Wei was touching up her makeup. Bai Shueli walked over to wash her hands and met AI Wei's eyes in the mirror. AI Wei said naturally, You and Mulin are not suitable. Bai Shueli directly leaned to the side and watched AI Wei touch up her makeup. To be honest, AI Wei was very beautiful and also very capable. She looked like the model of America's Hillary from many years ago. She had an aggressive type of beauty. She also did not know why her husband did not like this ice beauty called AI Wei now. In fact, at the beginning she thought that Yi Mulin called her Miss Bai for AI Wei. Later she felt that it was not the case. His attitude towards AI Wei was even worse than his attitude towards Secretary Li. Bai Shueli nodded and said lazily, Actually, I don't think it's suitable either. AI Wei looked at her. Bai Shueli looked down and played with her fingernails. He is 10 years older than me. There is a generation gap. I always want to divorce him, but he doesn't want to. She looked up at AI Wei. Can you help me persuade him? AI Wei's heart skipped a beat. Then she looked at her. Are you really willing to leave him? Bai Shueli sneered. It's not like the Yi family has an heir to the throne. Why should I cling on to an old man? He's so old-fashioned and his life is boring. AI Wei, why would you like such a boring man? She said it smoothly, but AI Wei's face turned ugly. Because Bai Shueli not only saw through her mind but also exposed it. AI Wei couldn't bear it because Bai Shueli didn't even have the basic manners. She was angry but she couldn't show it. Bai Shueli didn't stand on ceremony with her and chuckled, Lawyer AI, you are a lawyer. You should know that being a mistress won't be punished by the law, but it will be condemned morally. You don't want your career to be affected by your personal affairs, do you? AI Wei's expression was a bit arrogant. In my heart, my career will always come first. Oh, I'm different from you. Bai Shuali smiled carelessly. My own happiness is the most important thing. AI Wei looked down on her. You are too selfish, Mulan. This is selfishness? Also, Yi Mulan likes this kind of life. Can you replace him? Bai Shuali smiled. Lawyer AI, isn't it selfish of you to intervene in other people's lives? AI Wei was a lawyer, and a very famous one at that, but at this time she couldn't win against Bai Shuali not because of anything else, but because Bai Shuali was that person's wife. She still wanted to say something, but Yi Mulan's voice came from the bathroom door. Your favorite dessert has been served. AI Wei wanted to say that she didn't order dessert, but she suddenly thought of something and remained silent. She went out first. When she passed by Yi Mulan, he said, Don't bully her. She doesn't know anything. AI Wei almost burst into tears. Since when was nothing an advantage? She paused, smiled and left, maintaining her demeanor. Yi Mulan looked at Bai Shuali and said in a low voice, How long are we going to stay here? You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.